Hi there, Alex Kidman with my quick review of the Huawei Nova 7i. But before I start, just want to say a thank you to everyone who has watched the videos this year, everyone who has liked and subscribed, and of course, if you're new to the channel, please like, please subscribe. Numbers are building up nicely, and it helps to justify me doing more of these. But now, on with the show, and the show in this case is, of course, this phone, the Huawei Nova 7i. Now, here in Australia, Huawei's only really released a few phones this year, and every single other one has been a flagship phone, a P-series phone, a mate phone, high spec but very high price. The Nova 7i isn't that kind of phone. This is a mid-range phone. Here in Australia, it'll run you $499. And the mid-range in 2020 has been an exceptional kind of space. There have been so many very, very good phones, but then Huawei has a history of being quite disruptive in phone markets, delivering really, really good value. Have they done that with the Nova 7i? Well, yes and no. So let me explain what I mean by that. For your $499, what you're getting is a 6.4-inch LCD, and in Australia, only in this midnight black colour. In other markets, it looks like there are other colours of the Nova 7i, but not here. And it's a plastic-backed phone, and like most glossy black plastic phones, it's going to be covered by your fingerprints minutes after you pick it up. It's just the nature of life. But look, the design is fine, if a little unexceptional. One thing that did surprise me a lot of Huawei's phones have started to use in-display fingerprint readers, and theirs have been some of the best. This doesn't have that. Instead, you get this side-mounted combination power and fingerprint reader button. I've seen that on quite a few phones this year. I don't mind it, but it's not the best. I'd rather either have in-display for the convenience or a full circle around the back, because you generally get a slightly better read off those. So what do I like about this phone? Where does it really stand out? Well, one of the areas is the camera. So at the back, you've got a primary 48 megapixel sensor, then an 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, 2 megapixel macro, and then a 2 megapixel focusing lens. And look, there's an awful lot of that particular recipe, even those numbers, in mid-range phones this year. So it sort of seemed like this was going to be a very, very average phone to me. But it's not. It actually outshoots a lot of its competition. And I'll throw up some examples here. Where I was really impressed was things like the macro lens. So lots and lots of phones this year, lots of mid-range phones have had a 2 megapixel macro lens, and they've just generally been pretty awful at actually working all that well. This one can, not always, can deliver quite pleasing macro shots, some really nice focus, some nice effects. It's a fun sort of camera to use for a mid-range phone, and that extends across the entire camera. Now, what you don't get, of course, at the back is any kind of telephoto. If you want telephoto, Huawei wants an awful lot more of your money. What you instead get is a digital zoom. Of course, you got a digital zoom. But here again, I like what Huawei's done, because instead of opting for, 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, we've seen some crazy numbers in digital zoom this year. This only goes as high as 6 times optical zoom. And you might think, well, 6 times isn't much. I want more. The reality is you probably don't. 6 times actually keeps it within a sane level where the combination of post-processing and, of course, cropping down that 48 megapixel sensor means it can still deliver quite good 6 times shots, even though they're not optical shots. Now, the one thing you, of course, don't get is any image stabilization. So if you are shooting at those higher telephoto ranges, you're going to want a tripod to get the best possible results. But still, the camera is a real standard, and I suppose I shouldn't be surprised there. Again, this is something that Huawei has done rather well. Now, in terms of under the hood, it's running on one of Huawei's own Kirin 810 processors, and that marks it out as quite unique. I mean, in the mid-range for Android, it's basically Qualcomm till you get down to those MediaTek processors. And it's a reasonably powerful chip. Now, for reasons I'll get into in a minute, I had to sideload benchmarks onto this, so I can't 100% trust them. But basically, yeah, look, this runs about the same as every other $500 to $600 phone you can get right now. Sometimes a little bit nippier. Huawei typically is quite aggressive with how it does memory management and how it keeps apps open or closes them to keep phones running smoothly. Great if you don't really multitask so much. Not so great if you want to go back to apps, because sometimes you'll find, oh, it's closed that app, I actually want it open, and you have to wait a little bit. But typically not too long. This is a reasonably quick phone. Battery life is okay. Again, that cutting down of apps does give it a little bit more battery juice. It's not as great as some Huawei phones I've seen in the past, which can really wow you with multi-day battery life. But again, within that mid-range price space, it's fine. So what don't I like? Well, look, this has the same problems that every Huawei phone has had for about the last 18 months. And if you're wondering, what are those problems? Because you're not aware of what's going on with Huawei and its phones right now. Put simply, Huawei is blocked from having direct Google Play services loaded onto its Android phones. And what that means is this is an Android phone. It is running Android 10, but only the open source parts of it. You don't get Google Play Store, you don't get pre-installed YouTube or Gmail or Google Maps. And you might be thinking, well, why does that really matter? Is that really a problem? Huawei's got a couple of solutions to that problem, but none of them are terribly great. So the first solution it has is its own app gallery. And this is where it's trying to compete with the Google Play Store, but really not quite as well. A lot of the apps you might want are not there. You can request them, but that just says, hey, I want this app. It doesn't really do much to force the app developers to make it available on App Gallery. And months and months into App Gallery, yes, it's growing. Yes, it's slowly getting better, but still lots and lots of apps you might want that aren't going to be there, especially streaming apps are pretty thin on the ground. Lots of banking apps you can't find. It's kind of messy, and there's also a lot of garbage, especially in games. There's so many knockoff games and shonky games on there, and these are the ones that get promoted as well. Huawei needs to do a little bit better to convince me that it's really properly curating App Gallery. The other thing that Huawei has is what it calls Petal search. Now, Petal search allows you to search for the APK, those are the install files, for just about any Android app you'd care to name. And if there's some kind of public repository, it will find them and it will guide you to download them and install them. So all well and good, right? You could search for anything, you could install anything. Well, you could, but you probably shouldn't. See, the problem here is that when you download something from, say, the Google Play Store, for example, you've got reasonable odds, I'm not going to say 100%, but you've got reasonable odds that it is what it says it is, that it's reasonably safe and secure. Yes, there have been some issues with apps on Google Play, but nowhere near the quantity as you get by just what's called side-loading apps, that is downloading apps that you find on the internet. And that's the problem. You're never really going to know, is the app that I'm installing the latest version? Is it secure? Is it even what it says it is? I wouldn't, for example, be downloading Netflix to this phone and punching my Netflix credentials in, because God knows where that data is actually going to end up. God knows what the app is actually going to do. It's a risky move. If you know what you're doing, if you're comfortable with the risk, then okay, you can turn the Nova 7i into a fairly close approximation of an actual full Google Android phone. But for the mass consumer market, no, I don't see it. And it's a big problem, even in the mid-range space. Now, I really didn't like that on the flagship Huawei phones, because I figure if you're paying $2,000 plus for a phone, it really should do everything. There should be nothing missing. But even on a $500 phone, look, you can get other $500 phones that do everything, and this one just doesn't. This is a big problem for Huawei, and you can argue amongst yourselves about the geopolitics of it, of whether it's fair, whether it's not, but the reality for anyone who buys this phone is that it will do less than a comparable Android phone at the same price in terms of apps, and I think that's a huge problem that Huawei is yet to entirely leap over in a satisfactory way. So where does that leave the Nova 7i? Well, look, ultimately, this is really quite good hardware for the money. Very competitive, great cameras for the money, not the best you'll ever see on a phone, of course, because you're only spending $500, but very, very good. However, while the hardware is great, the software is not. And this just continues to be a problem for Huawei. I can't entirely recommend the Nova 7i unless you're really willing to take a lot of risks, or you just don't care about anything outside of really core applications for your smartphone and you want those cameras. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the Nova 7i. What do you think? Are you keen on Huawei's phones generally? Let me know in the comments below. And once again, of course, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.